My name's John Vinalas, and I'm super excited today to have a new friend on the show. We're going to be talking with JB Simmons, is an author, and we're just going to kind of get to know him together. JB, I've read a few of your books. I'm not quite through book 5 of the Five Towers. But I was reading those with my son, and we loved them. I it gave me a little bit of a workout as in sort of like dramatic reading, because I started sort of trying to read accents for all the different characters, sort of like based on where they were from. Uh, and
Ooh,
so,
that would be tough.
there ended up being lots and lots of characters, and so it was kind of tough. I kind of tended to just read Cypher in my own voice, since he was the main character. And let's see, and now it's been a while actually since I was reading them. But I kind of had to sometimes like go back and revise what kind of voice I was giving the different characters, because sort of more information would come out about who they were and where they were from and so on. But doing a French accent is super fun, and so on. But anyway,
There's British
um,
accent, there's the whole range. And
yeah.
this is jumping way ahead, but a funny story is that I enjoy a good audiobook narrated by the author. And I thought, let me give this a try. And so I recorded the first few chapters. I shared it with some friends, and they said, you know, we'll let the podcast listeners judge this, but they said your voice is fine, but you cannot do it. You hire a professional. So he's
Yeah.
professionally narrated an audiobooks and found a fantastic narrator who really pulled off the accents well, because it covers most accents in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of different accents in there. So this is like jumping way into the middle of any conversation that we should be having about the books, though, because nobody has any context for what we're talking about. But like, tell me just a little bit about yourself before we really dive into sort of the meat of the discussion here today. What's your um, what are your major sort of geek fandoms that you enjoy? Like, what kind of got you into that? What was your gateway drug, if you will? And just a little bit about you and what your deal is.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's great to be on the podcast. Thanks for the invitation to join. As you mentioned, I'm an author. I've been writing for about 12 years now. If you wanted to capture the theme of all of my books, you might call it bringing hope to dystopia. So
Okay, awesome.
there's a dystopian speculative feel to a lot of my fiction, and that stems from roots in the classics of children's literature, from C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia to Lord of the Rings. Read much more broadly, particularly in kind of the fantasy and dystopian genres.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly I was seeing over the past, let's say, 20 to 30 years, that everything was getting darker and darker, and
Mm-hmm.
and and not in a way that was there can be interesting dark stories. Edgar Allan Poe writes
Sure.
dark poetry that's classic and good, but it actually often points to a virtue or something meaningful, whereas there was almost a nihilism in a lot of the stuff I was reading that was coming out more recently. And I thought,
Yeah.
I have kids, and I want them to have more stories that point to something good, even if they are tackling crazy things like the battles that happen in the Five Towers, and other topics in other books. But that's kind of what drove it. I would say too that I honed my craft as a lawyer. So I'm, as a
Oh,
lawyer by
okay,
trade,
interesting.
and kind of practice the art of writing in that venue, but
That's a
felt the
super demanding kind of writing. So like I imagine that really helps you on the technical end of things to write with precision and what's the word I'm looking for? Um concisely with there's like one good small word. What's the not laconic, but it sort of gets at that. Um
Well,
anyway.
I'll give a recommendation to you and to everyone listening, which is when I was in law school, there was a book by E.B. White called The Elements of Style. We called it Strunk and White, but E.B. White is the
Yeah,
author
I've heard of that.
of Charlotte's Web, another The Trumpeter Swan. He's brilliant. Go back and read his stuff because he has these layers of hilarious meaning in kids' stories. It's really phenomenal. But he had honed the craft of very tight, very sparse, clean writing. And he has another great line, which I think works well when you're coming from a legal background to write fiction, which is you have to know the rules before you start breaking them, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
I had to learn the demands of writing in a very clear, formal way, but there was a part of me that yearned for a little more to let the creative side out, and it found
Yeah.
it in fiction.
So, apropos of that sentiment, really quick before I let you continue with your story, have you ever read The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss?
I have indeed, yes.
Yeah, so that's exactly like that for me that is the like prime example of like knowing the rules and conventions of fantasy literature in order to like break them in really clever ways.
Oh yeah. I mean, Name of the Wind is that's just a brilliant book.
I always say it's one of the best fantasy novels of the last 20 years easily.
Oh yes, I would agree with that. And I can't remember the story, but I think he posted somewhere about, the amount he's one of these authors who spent forever writing that book. It was a
Yeah.
long,
Yeah,
long
he'd been
labor.
writing it for 10 years before it was published at all in the first place. Yeah.
Exactly. And it shows.
Yep. Okay, sorry, go ahead. Continue then.
No, so that was kind of what sparked it, doing a lot of writing in a legal career and then having these big ideas and then there was another book that really flipped a switch for me, and it was a surprising book because it's by Stephen King, famous
Uh-huh.
author,
Yeah.
and I'll be honest, I had not even read his fiction before I read his memoir on writing.
Yeah.
And that memoir really um,
It's a
was
fabulous book. I've read it too.
and I did the audiobook narrated by Stephen King
Yep.
is phenomenal.
It is.
Highly, I mean, I think it's one of like the best books. It's just
That's
amazing.
actually that's actually how I read it. I do most of my reading on audio because I in my everyday life I drive a concrete truck, and so I have lots of time for listening to podcasts and audiobooks and not as much time for actually just sitting and reading, which is sad to me because I love to read, but I enjoy spending all that windshield time also taking in books on audio, and his work narrating that audiobook really is phenomenal for sure.
I agree. At least you get freedom of the mind while you're driving. I also listen to
Yeah.
that audiobook on some long drives, and I think one of the things that he imparted to me is the discipline of it.
Yes.
That you got to sit down and you do it. Another great author is Stephen Pressfield. He has a book called
Hmm.
about fighting resistance. And those books, the name of that book is The War of Art.
The War of
Those,
Art.
The
Okay.
War of Art, yeah, it's another great one. So those books kind of together got me disciplined about it, and that really matters. Not everyone's the same, but I don't believe in simply following the muse. I think
Sure.
you have to show up and you have to put in the work
Absolutely.
in a regular way. And when I got that inspiration from those guys, I started doing it in a more disciplined way. And then the book started flowing and readers started loving them. And here we are. I will say one of the funnest things as my kids have gotten older has been, and this is a promotion for anyone who has kids, as you do, who've gone through the Five Towers. I read the first person to hear the draft of The Blue Tower, which is the first book in the series,
Yeah.
was my then 8-year-old son.
Oh,
So
how
I,
wonderful is that?
so I would read the manuscript with a red pen in my hand to him. And
Yeah,
whenever he had a question or something was confusing to him, I would edit it because I wanted to make
that's
sure that it was a
fabulous.
story that even an 8-year-old, while they're not going to get all the nuances, they won't get the layers of meaning. They're gonna have a story they love that they want to stick with and read. So that was kind of a at that point I knew I was onto something special because he kept wanting more and more, and I thought, I'm not producing content fast enough for you. Wow, as every creator's challenge,
Right.
but that was a fun part of the process.
That's awesome. So you sort of answered this in a roundabout way as you were telling that story. Was your entree into fantasy fiction really Narnia and Lord of the Rings?
I think so. I mean, I've read very widely in that space for a
Hmm.
long time. It's interesting. I think everyone pretty much does and should start there, right? But it's not that much, and we
No, it's
all
not really.
celebrate it, and we should because it was the beginning of something amazing. But there have been so many other books, and you're only gonna go through it, as many times as you want to. But there's
Right.
a lot more. So I went much broader than that.
Okay. So
Yeah.
who are some of your favorite fantasy authors then, besides Tolkien and Lewis?
Let me give some specific books that I'll say things that I really like about it, but I also this is the challenge of being an author. You start to see things differently, and there are things that I was
Okay.
like, I don't love this about what you did, but I
Sure.
still completely respect it. So look, I'll give you a few examples. I mean, I'd say a lot of people know Brandon Sanderson. I,
Sure.
I think he's brilliant. He finished, so I did the whole Wheel of Time
Yeah.
series probably, as a high schooler. I cranked through those books, and then
Right.
Brandon Sanderson came in and finished it.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I was immersed in that world. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it pulled from a lot of interesting kind of philosophical frameworks, had great characters, great story. And yet, sitting here today, while it was exactly what I wanted at the time, those books and Brandon Sanderson's latest books, which are also awesome, like The Way of Kings, but
Yeah.
they're super long. They are
They are very long.
they are
So
so long, and I mad respect to him. I love it, but the modern world moves fast, and I think it's hard to hold
yeah.
attention for that long.
Man, Sanderson is a machine, though, right? Like he just like the amount, the pure volume of words that he writes is just astounding. And so I read The Wheel of Time a little bit later. I was not in high school, but man, long about book 8, I was dying for it to be over.
Oh yeah,
I
I
just
mean,
like
it's too
and
long.
there are, and I've gone on this hobby horse on this show before, but like there are moments of just absolutely transcendent awesomeness in the Wheel of Time, but on the whole, I kind of like wish that I had those like 2 years back that I spent reading those books, because there's just so much, like like the entire book. I forget which one it is where at the end that Rand cleanses Saidar. Is that book 5 or book 6? I don't remember.
I don't remember the exact one either.
But then the entire next book after that is like side characters that you don't care about, like coming up to and reacting to that event. And that was maddening. That drove me absolutely bonkers. I was like, I don't care about any of this. Can we please move the story forward?
Exactly, and I think there's a place for that. We love getting lost in these big epic stories, but it is a little bit of an opportunity cost because there are a lot of good books out there. There's a lot of amazing
Yeah.
stories, and if you're going to go that deep in something that long, and it's funny because I've had other great series that I have no doubt are great recommended to me by
Hmm.
friends and others that I will not do because I just know how long it would take me to get through it.
Right. How about Brooks? Have you read Terry Brooks?
I've read Terry Brooks. Yep. Those, what's your favorite of his books?
Wow. Um, Probably Druid.
Yeah.
I think is that the one? Is that the one with quickening?
Yeah, that's right. Hmm.
Yeah, man. Like there are few. Um, there are few Christ figures in fantasy literature that really like just arrested me and like broke my heart the way that quickening did.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I always, I've read a lot of Terry Brooks, but I often would read it kind of in the middle of other things. I never had a
Hmm.
single Terry Brooks season, but I'm a big fan. Let me name another one that, and it's funny because now both of these are being made into shows. So we have Wheel of Time. It's been a
Right.
show, and then Game of Thrones, which I think is probably the
Yeah.
one that put fantasy on the map. And I have so many thoughts about it. Let me tell you my story about Game of Thrones. So I
Sure.
read the first book way before, like around the time it came out, I think.
Yeah.
And I remember reading it like in a dark basement, and that first chapter just like spooked me out, and it was
Yeah.
brilliant, and I was hooked. And so I started cranking through the Game of Thrones, and I think it was around book 4 when the level of nihilism and depravity,
Sure.
I stopped, and I and
Yeah.
I and I didn't go back, and I haven't watched the show, in part because I've actually met George R. R. Martin, and he's a
Oh wow.
quirky he's a quirky guy, and it's a dark set of books. It
Yeah.
starts out with this amazing writing and amazing gripping story, characters you love, but it's it spirals out into nothingness. And
Yeah.
even he couldn't land the plane in the books, as I understand it. But
Well, it seems like he's really struggling to, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, and so, but it was actually, that was a series that served as a really strong um, influence for me, because
Hmm.
I loved the writing, I liked the characters, I liked the story, but I didn't like the direction, the vector of it. And I thought,
Yeah.
I want to try to make something that's as good as I can in that vein, that points to something good. And
Sure.
so that was he was a powerful example in a contrarian way for me.
Yeah, that's sort of a good counter example for sure. Right. um, so I actually had collected most of those books, or the books that were out. I had books 1 through 5, and I hadn't gotten around to them yet because it had been recommended to me. And then the show had started, and I started hearing about just how, like you said, like the depravity and the sort of moral. Um, I don't know if I want to say moral bankruptcy of it, but at least the moral ambiguity
No, I think you can go
of it.
bankruptcy. I think that's fair.
um and and I just was like, I don't need that. There's other stuff to read that is not, that dark. And it was the same way for me, um with a TV show like Breaking Bad. I
Right.
had heard it was amazing, that it was so well done, and I got like 3 episodes in, and I was just, I'm out. I don't need this much darkness, and it's every bit as sordid as the story of a drug dealer would it be expected to be. And I don't want it.
If you go back to the originals of the Lord of the Rings, you've got good wins, right? The light
Yeah.
defeats the dark, and it's almost as if every creator has been falling all over themselves to go contrary to the archetype story. And now I'm the contrarian one for actually wanting good to win. I mean, it's
Right.
like, how dare you? Like, well, those
Yeah.
were the original stories that made it, And I think there's an appetite for it. I think people want more stories where there's hope, and
Yeah.
there's, of course, there's amazing worlds and magic and characters and challenges and bad guys. You got to have great bad guys, but
Hmm.
that doesn't mean you have to win, or that there's this has to be this kind of nihilism at the heart of it all.
Right. Yeah, and that sort of always was the realm of epic fantasy, right? To be the light versus dark, kind of archetypes. Um, I recently read the first book of the Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Okay. That's one of
Uh,
those super long ones that's been recommended to me that I haven't done
yeah,
yet. Should I read it?
you know, it sort of falls into the same grimdark genre or subgenre as Game of Thrones, and I don't know if I can wholeheartedly recommend it. It's very um it does seem to be kind of nihilistic, at least in the first book gives that vibe. um it's very I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, like magic in that world is intensely destructive.
Okay.
It's unbelievably destructive. And 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 it's so one of the things that I love about Brooks is that his magic always comes with a cost. Like, it's dangerous,
Yeah.
and it can, if you're not really careful about it, and sometimes even if you are careful about it, it can do a lot of harm to you as a magic user. Like, you have to be so careful, and it's very alluring and dangerous. um and and the sort of the funny thing about Brooks is his magic system is really amorphous, right? And it changes from generation to generation. That's kind of one of the whole deals of the Almsford family, is the way that magic changes and changes its users. um but it's not like, but in the Malazan book, or the first one at least, like, it's oppressive. Like, the atmosphere of the Malazan books is oppressive. That's what I would say. It's it was a fascinating read. Like, it was pretty compelling, but it's not, lighthearted in any way.
Well,
And
it's
I would not, I couldn't really recommend it unless you really, like, if you want something that's gonna sort of like plumb the depths of like, uh, I don't know. I might be going a little bit too far with that. Like, it's not lighthearted. It's pretty grim, um, and there's not a lot of hope or fun.
yeah.
And
Eh,
sometimes that's a vibe that people want to, like, get into for a little while, just to sort of like work through some kind of, feelings about that kind of stuff, and I think that's fine and valid. But it's not a world that I would be interested in inhabiting for, like, however many more books there are in that series. I think there's a lot of them.
well, it's a good segue to the other genre I mentioned, because I think there's a place for that in literature, but that's a really long series, and I probably don't want to get sucked into that world. But let me give a couple examples of amazing books that are super dark, but for the in the right way, and
Hmm.
actually with a message that resonates, and you see this because these books persist as bestsellers. So, Lord of the Flies,
Sure.
1984,
Yeah.
Hunger Games. So these are books that they they're dystopian. Like that's the
Yeah.
point. And it's meant to showcase what happens when things go wrong, and
Right.
or to reveal something about human nature. But those books do it in a way that is tight and more literary. Whereas I
Yeah.
think when you get pulled into an epic fantasy, I want to get swept up into the great myth. I want to be pulled into a story
Yeah.
that's going to inspire me in the end, and that's the purpose of that. I think that's the sweet spot of that genre, which Lord of the Rings was the archetype of.
Right.
Whereas with a dystopian story, fine, show how bad it gets when
Yeah.
Big Brother is watching, or when you throw a bunch of boys out into the wild. That's
Hmm.
okay.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, you've seen this, right? I'm sure you saw the influence of that genre. In a way, the Five Towers combines those two. I think there's a
Yeah.
dystopian vibe, but there's a fantasy um, genre as well.
Sure. Sure. Okay. So, uh, talk just a little bit. Give the listeners the pitch for the Five Towers series, because we've sort of mentioned it a little bit, and and I know sort of the tagline is sort of, the magic of Harry Potter and the message of Narnia.
That's the tagline. You said it. And what that means is it is going. It's a story that it's got huge meaning. It's loaded with impact, but it's also just really fun. You're going to enjoy the characters. You're going to love getting swept up into it. The Five Towers is a 5-book series. It has each tower is unique. It has kind of a different culture, a different set of rules, and ultimately different kind of vices and virtues that the characters are working through, and that are
Yeah.
being revealed in those places. And all 5 towers meet together in this battle in the center called the Scouring. And through that process, you start to learn that, and I'm not going to give a complete spoiler, but these individuals are coming from all walks of history and time, and it's the ultimate clashing of people and civilizations, but in a way where everyone is kind of working towards something bigger, and then there's a lot of teamwork, a lot of working together. And then the last thing I would say, and it sounds like you did this, John, is it works. I've Kids don't lie. And
Right.
kids in the, like, I don't know, third to seventh, eighth grade range devour these books.
Yeah.
I get pictures, I get messages all the time where parents say, my 12-year-old son or my 10-year-old daughter just read through the whole series for the third time, and I'm blown away by those. And
Yeah.
I think it's because it's a fun story. I Unlike the big epic fantasy tomes, I really try to write action packed, tight prose, short chapters. It moves fast. It's got a lot of
Yeah.
action and excitement. And then at the same time, if you're reading it out loud and you're a parent, or if you're just a parent and you want a great story, it has the double layer, right? It's like a Pixar movie where you've got the layer of action, but then you're getting these looks back at who these people are, what happened in their lives, why are they here, what's going on. And in that layer, I think there's something for all of us: stories of redemption, light conquering the darkness, and hope that grandparents have said, wow, that was like really what I needed to hear. That was so
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yeah, the way that I was reading it to my oldest son, who he was probably sort of 12 at the time as we were going through it, is he would wash the dishes and I would read to him.
That's a good deal. I like it.
And yeah, it was fabulous. It was a good time. um so uh a lot of Christians kind of sometimes tend to be suspicious of fantasy, and don't like don't like magic. Um and sometimes they give Tolkien and Lewis a pass, A lot of times they'll give Lewis a pass because there's not a lot of actual magic, qua magic, in Narnia, except when it's being used by evil characters, right?
Right.
Um, and
Although Aslan's breath is pretty powerful, but I hear you.
yes, yes, but Aslan is Jesus, and
Yeah.
so that's
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people will give Lewis a pass. Many will give Tolkien a pass, but a lot sort of look askance even at Tolkien. Um, what is it about speculative fiction? And I sort of have my own answer for this, but what do you think it is about speculative fiction, fantasy and science fiction, sort of together, that makes Christians nervous?
Well, it could be, I think, from like a fundamentalist knee-jerk reaction. There's this, well, is this sorcery? Is this witchcraft?
Hmm.
And I mean, like Harry Potter is a great example. Lots of arguments on both sides of that. It's a kid's story, but there are witches in the series,
Right,
and like, and that can be debated. But I think there is that fear of, let's, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are
right.
true, let's
Hmm.
let's let's focus on those things. And that's true. I agree with that. I think I probably know where the next question is going. I think that's why there's a reaction against it. But at the same time, there's lots of mystery and there's lots of room for wonder in the
Hmm.
world that we see and that we experience, that you can't always explain with pure reason and logic and the text of the Bible. That, like,
Right.
there's room for more, and I think that's why these stories are appealing to people. And I don't think there necessarily has to be a litmus test on it, but I think that probably explains a little bit of why we came to where we are. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So so the thing that I've kind of been thinking about it for a little while is like, especially like, so in fantasy it's magic, right? Like, we don't like the idea of invoking powers to subvert the natural order, right? That's witchcraft, that's sorcery, that's that's something that the Bible speaks very, very strongly against, or at least we perceive it that way. And I think when you get into what um the original understanding of those injunctions might have been, it sort of presents a slightly more nuanced picture of that. But what I've been thinking a lot about is, especially in the realm of science fiction, and just sort of, this term of speculative fiction in general is something that many Christians are uncomfortable with, because it asks you to imagine a world that is other than the world that we have. And in the minds of a lot of these very, very good, but maybe a little bit uncurious people, the world that we have is the world as God wills it to be.
Yeah, and kind of
And
an anti-escapism is part of that too.
yeah, yeah. And if you are imagining something other than the world as God has willed it to be, then that's frivolous at best, and and sort of I don't know what the exact term that I would want to use to describe what it is at worst, but sort of doubting, or you know, uh, subversive of God's sovereignty, or something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, let me offer a couple thoughts. One, we're meant to be creative. We are meant to go forth and create. The other one, and I'm actually going to just tie this straight into my other series because it's even more directly at the heart of this issue. But
Okay.
let me tell you about it, and then I'll explain why. So this is a series. There's a radio host, nationally syndicated, who calls it "The Da Vinci Code meets Hunger Games meets Left Behind."
Okay.
So it is set in the future in the year 2066, and it is it's a novel. It's a trilogy, young adult fiction in style, but
Hmm.
it is looking at where our technology is taking us and
Yeah.
how that might intersect with some of the prophecies in the book of Revelation.
Okay.
It has been fascinating to see how people respond to this trilogy because, if you look at the Amazon reviews, it's 70% five-star reviews and 20% one-star reviews. There's no middle.
Yeah.
People, but and I actually have come to find some pride in that because what it means is that it's not about the story is it's a great trilogy. It's fast, it's page turning, it's fun, it's really mind blowing on some of the issues with our technology, but particularly fundamentalist Christians who are unwilling to have an open mind about things go crazy about it.
Yeah.
And it's orthodox. I truly believe that, and
Hmm.
I come from an orthodox. I'm an Anglican, so
Okay.
it's not out there in terms of
Yeah.
the actual theology, but it's set in the future. And
Yeah.
so when you start thinking about what happens when you implant a chip in someone's mind that gives them some extra computing power, what is
Hmm.
that?
Hmm.
Are we still humans? Or are there
Right.
still forces of good and evil at work? What about angels and demons? How do they feel about these kinds of things? So
Yeah.
it's
Interesting.
again it's an imagining epic about what could happen.
Yeah.
And I actually start the whole thing off with this is fiction, not prophecy. But I will say, as years go by, and the first book came out about 10 years ago,
Uh-huh.
the only thing that I seem to have gotten wrong so far is that I underestimated how fast it's happening.
That's something that I'm hearing a lot. I don't know, do you listen to Ezra Klein at all? Do
I
you know
do
who
know
that
Ezra
is?
Klein, yes.
Yeah. He's been talking a lot about AI in the last year or so, and it does seem pretty astonishing, like the rate of speed at which that whole realm of technology is developing. Um, and just real quick, for my own curiosity, where are you on sort of a eschatological uh, point of view?
I have a blog series that I wrote because readers were always writing to me and asking, well, what do you really think here? And um, I'm a millennial, so
Uh huh.
I disagree with the theology of Left Behind.
Okay. Good.
And yeah, it's but it's I think it's a place of wonder and a place of
Yeah.
mystery and excitement, and I write about it in that way. And ultimately, if you've read the Bible, you know the ending, and the
Right.
question is just how are we going to get there? And I think this was a fun way to explore what might happen, what is our technology doing to us, and what does God think about that?
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a real dearth of amillennial perspectives, and so I would have been interested to that other series anyway, and that just makes me even more interested because boy, the whole dispensational outlook on stuff, I think, has done a lot of damage.
I
and
agree.
uh
Yeah. Yeah. So the
and
first book is called Unbound by JB Simmons.
yeah.
And then it's followed by Clothed with the Sun and Great White Throne is the third book of
Okay.
the trilogy.
Have you read The Lamb Among the Stars?
I don't think I have, no.
So that's an interesting sort of a post mill. Um, or yeah, sort of a post millennial kind of outlook on things. It's set in the fairly distant future where uh there's sort of the 1,000 year reign, uh where the effects of the fall have sort of been muted, and humanity sort of lives in this sort of quasi um what's the word I'm looking for, uh quasi restored kind of state of harmony and great, scientific advancement, and then there's sort of this final push from evil to sort of destroy everything and upend the entire deal, and there are some really interesting ideas there, um but the first couple of books, uh sort of as the series goes along, this sort of suspension of the fall kind of starts to break down, and that's when it gets more interesting because
Oh.
perfect people kind of tend to not have a lot of drama going on,
Right.
and and so there's a lot of there's some interesting things there, but on the whole, it was a little bit staid.
Okay.
Staid. It was a little, there wasn't tons of energy or like life in the prose, and so I didn't love it, and that sort of leads me to another question I kind of wanted to get at with you a little bit here. Um, to be sort of not too, you know uh mean spirited about it. um I kind of feel like a lot of Christian science fiction and fantasy um isn't great.
Oh yeah, you're preaching to the choir.
And I wonder why that is, because is it this thing that, like, we're just sort of a little bit uncomfortable with with sort of the basic approach of the genre of speculative fiction, that, like, that we don't know how to, is it that our sense of curiosity and mystery is sort of stunted because of how, especially in sort of evangelicalism, that we sort of like things to be really neatly defined and systematized down into tidy little boxes.
I think you're spot on, but I do think there's hope. So I think if you look at the sweep of this over time, I think we've been in the dark ages of Christian creativity over the past, I don't know, 30, 40 years, something like that. And I don't mean that there are good things. There have been
Sure.
great works that have come out. But I think there was um, I think partly it goes to the actual production, publishing, marketing piece of it, in the sense
uh
that there were market dynamics. And I know from personal experience and contacts that there are some big publishing houses that, for a long time have not been that friendly to a Christian worldview.
right, sure.
Um, so I think there was a market dynamic behind it. I think what we've seen though in the past, let's say 10 to 15 years, is a change in a positive way, because I think as people can get more directly to their audience, to their
Hmm.
their fans, there is
You
a
mean sort of
huge.
the ability to self-publish and things like that?
Yes, and let me give you the what I think is the best success story of this in the past decade, which is Angel Studios. So
Okay.
those guys who produced The Chosen, and they're now producing a lot of other great content.
Wing
That
feather.
Wing Feather Saga, they've found a way, and actually Andrew Peterson is doing this too, where they're creating something that is direct access, and they're using all the traditional tools, and I do the same, where you're it's a published, fully edited, properly marketed piece, but there are ways to tap into an audience that are more decentralized now. Whereas, like
Yeah.
Angel Studios raised funds from a lot of the viewers of The Chosen who loved the show. At the
Right.
same time, authors can use Patreon accounts. I have a lot of my sales come from a large mailing list of fans who have just found me over time, and they
Hmm.
sign up, and I can reach them directly, and they want to hear about what's coming and what's next. And so there's more opportunities for reach to a Christian audience that is rightly hungry for good creative content, including in the speculative genre. And so I think it's changing. I think it's good. Another fun one is that I did about a year and a half ago. I was a Kickstarter supporter for a board game called Deliverance.
Oh, okay.
Super cool game. It's very well made. It's this angels versus demons kind
I
of
think I heard
concept.
about this.
Yeah, and
That sounds familiar.
I put in the money for the Kickstarter a year and a half ago because I love playing board games with my kids, and
Yeah.
there aren't that many that are Christian themed, and there certainly aren't that many good ones.
Right.
And so
Have you
I
ever
thought,
played Bibleopoly?
I have not, no.
Good. It's awful.
Okay. I'm duly warned. Um, so I supported this on Kickstarter, and then a year and a half later, the box shows up. It looks fantastic. It's
Yeah.
made as well as other popular games like Scythe or Wingspan. It's got all these great parts.
Right.
It's super fun to play with a family. Great messages, and I thought this whole process was not possible 15 years ago.
Sure.
And now we're getting that content created. People are finding an audience. And so, support the creatives, If you have
Yeah.
someone who has a product you believe in, a book you love, you think it's an area you might be interested in, go for it. Don't trust the top 10 on the New York Times bestseller list because a lot of
Right.
it's
Ugh.
nihilistic trash. and
Yeah.
and try to talk to your friends. Still, the best way to find books that are inspiring and that you'll love is to ask your friends, like, what's the best book you read in the past year,
Sure.
and talk to people. And then occasionally some brilliant guy named John will reach out and say, hey, you want to be on the podcast? And so then you jump on and you do it. It's great.
Yeah. Um, so I wasn't really intending to go here, but we've sort of brought this term up a bunch already, and I sort of have a very recent example of this. Um, what's the deal with like nihilism being equated with like depth and like artsiness, and like why is it that like the things that are like touted as like being so brilliant and artful and everything are so nihilistic? And like the experience that I recently had with this was just the other day I went to see the movie Civil War.
Okay. I haven't
And
seen it, but cool.
I don't know what I was really expecting from it. I didn't expect to have a good time, certainly. Um, but I have the Regal Unlimited subscription, and so I thought, I feel like this is gonna be, there's gonna be conversations around this, and so I would kind of like to be able to be part of that. And I was a little bit disappointed that the main uh message of the film seems to be war bad.
Got it.
And if and any proximity to war just causes you to lose your soul. And and there's an extent to which that may be true, um but it was extremely nihilistic, and that there was no sort of distinction between any side in that movie. There were not good guys, and even the protagonists of the film, this sort of plucky uh, band of intrepid journalists, um, were not really good either in the end. And like, what is it about our cultural moment that is sort of conflating nihilism with high art?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I'll just flag the first book that I read that made this clear to me was another author who's been wildly successful. He's very talented, named John Green. He wrote a book called The Fault in Our Stars,
Yeah.
made into a movie. The
Hmm.
book's hilarious, it's really well done, and it is purely nihilistic at its core. And I think he tapped into this desire or this need that people have, and these were younger readers, but
Right.
I think it's a broader thing about all of our modern culture, and they don't feel meaning in themselves. So that, like,
Mm.
what is truth, what is my North Star? They don't have it.
Right.
They're two different ways you can deal with that problem. One is you can find something that gives you a high five and says, "You figured it out. You're right. There is no meaning. There is no North Star." The other is to find meaning and find the North Star. And I think
Right.
a lot of the art, the books, the movies that are nihilistic are these high fives to people who are drowning. And it makes them feel a little bit better as they go down, but it's really sad.
Yeah.
And I, I think I think it's one of the most destructive forces that is kind of percolating underneath a lot of modern culture. And it's the war example is great because I recently rewatched the movie Braveheart with my son.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had not seen it before. I hadn't
How
seen
old
it.
is he now?
He's 13.
Okay, 13's a pretty good age for Braveheart, I think.
It was great. It was great. It was, gruesome for a 13-year-old, but we had fun with it. And
Yeah.
I hadn't seen it in a long time. And the first of all, the dialogue in that movie, I forgot how good it was. It's just
Yeah.
really well done script. And it's so much hope. It's so much virtue in the midst of huge challenges and suffering. But people are fighting for a cause. They
Hmm.
believe in something. And a lot of the nihilistic art today says no, don't believe in anything, nothing matters,
Right.
don't have hope.
The
And
only meaning is the meaning that you make.
right, and if
Yeah.
anyone is honest with themselves, I don't think they want to be their own god.
Well, not if they really think it through. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly, but
Yeah.
they don't. And this leads to we're easily distracted, we're disconnected from communities because of technology, and all these problems are wrapped up together. But I think you put your finger on the right question that people should be asking.
Yeah. All right. I feel like time has kind of gotten away from us, and there was a whole section of this that I think we're not going to be able to get into that I kind of wanted to. But let's start to circle in for a landing with this. Um, and maybe I'm going to phrase it less of a question as more of a thought, and you can kind of tell me what you think about this. Um, the the hesitancy for us for Christians to engage with fantasy and speculative fiction more broadly, to me, is puzzling, because um, what what are Jesus's parables if not speculative fiction? You
That's
know,
right.
and
The
I was told, or I heard somebody talk about the parables recently in a way that was new to me, but like helps me to make so much more sense of them in sort of opposition to how they are commonly used as just sort of straightforward morality tales. You know, uh,
Yeah. I mean,
the prodigal son, the prodigal son is bad because he wasted his father's inheritance, and he needed grace from his father. And the older son is also bad because he was too judgmental. And we sort of just turn them into these neat little morality plays instead of allowing them to show us a world into which we are invited to come and live.
I love that. You know, what changes people's minds 2,000 years ago and today is not arguments. What
Right.
changes people's minds and their hearts is stories. Stories change people.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus is the greatest storyteller ever. We're still trying to unpack the meaning of these super short stories.
Yeah.
People still write books about the prodigal son every year. And it's a story with only a few characters, but
Mm-hmm.
it grips you because it cuts right to the heart of what matters to people, and it's got so many layers of meaning, and we're called to be like him. We should be creating stories that do the same thing. So I think you're exactly right that people turned away from it. I think actually the one guy who's uncelebrated but should get more fame in this is George MacDonald, who was
Yeah, sure.
he was the inspiration for Lewis. Lewis
Right.
actually wrote like a daily um, reflection book based on George MacDonald's writings. George MacDonald was a Scottish pastor who
Yeah.
was writing fantasy on the side. And so, you know, there's this has been a groundswell that's it's ebbed and flowed a little bit, but consistently it should be on the rise. We need to be telling the best stories.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be using stories to reach people because that's how people change. That's how people learn.
So we can kind of come back a little bit to one of these earlier questions of like why does Christian fantasy sort of broadly suck? And and I think maybe some of it is this discomfort with ambiguity and mystery as well. Like we've got this idea that like for it to be a good Christian thing, like it has to clearly present the gospel, and whatever character is wayward has to accept the gospel in order for this to be a proper, Christian TM product.
Yeah, you know, there. It's funny. I after reading Stephen King's On Writing, I read his book, The Stand, and
Yeah,
he has this character in The Stand who's like a pure gospel thumper. It's amazing. And I
yeah,
thought, like, no Christian writer is writing the gospel as compelling as Stephen King did with this character.
absolutely.
And
I read The Stand not too long ago, and I love it.
yeah, and so I do think we're a little too trite. We just follow the tropes of what's been done, and people aren't, as you said, willing to explore a little more these hard issues honestly. I think it's a
Yeah,
little too lighthearted. It's almost like uh 90s gospel music. I mean, it's like it doesn't get to where people really feel strongly. It doesn't get to the real hurt or the real loves
yeah,
or the real challenges that people have. And if you don't go there, you know, we're not going to win. We're not
right.
going to. People aren't going to see the truth because they're going to see through it.
Yeah.
Readers are smart. Movie watchers are smart. People
Hmm.
know stories innately. They know what's true and what's not. And if it's shallow or manufactured, they're just gonna walk away.
Yes, like the discerning ones will. But then but sort of something that challenges that statement that you just made is like the absolute juggernauts that a lot of these Kendrick brothers films have been, right? Because there, I think there are a lot of Christians who are um who are who are kind of shell shocked by how depraved the culture has become,
Yeah.
and just want something comforting and safe, and that's why the market provides the comforting and safe thing. And then, lots of um I don't want to sound like, super, you know pretentious and superior, but like undiscerning, Christian media consumers, you know, just love their fireproofs and they're courageous and they're facing the giants and all of these things, because all of those stories get wrapped up in tidy little bows at the end, and the good people prevail and the bad people get their comeuppance, and like, hooray, isn't Jesus great?
Look, there's a formula in some ways for a movie that you feel good about when you walk out, and people have that formula down and they're gonna nail it. And you're right, that's gonna be there. But no one's. I'm gonna go bold here. In 50 years, no one's gonna be watching Fireproof.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
They will definitely still be reading The Lord of the Rings.
Yep. Yeah,
So, there's always gonna be the mainstream stuff, but it kind of is just a constant churn of good and bad, and
sure.
that's fine. But I think the things that endure and actually kind of embed themselves in the culture and in the mind, that's what we should be chasing. That's what we should be looking for. That's what I'm trying to write.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that is a pretty good place to land for now, because I know we are coming up on the end of the time that we have. And I'm sorry to spring this on you. I forgot to mention before, but every episode we like to end with a little segment that I call "Guaranteed Good News."
Okay.
And we I like to pull a feel good story. Um, and something I've been trying to do is elicit some good news from my guests and co-hosts. And so I wonder if you have anything off the top of your head that's like actually like close to you in your life, that you could share with the listeners. Um, and if not, then that's okay. I've got something that I can pull in right here.
Yeah, I'll share something cool and good news. There's been a lot of commentary about this crisis of manhood in our culture and raising boys to be men, and their suffering.
Yeah.
I've seen several things over the past year that give me a lot of hope for good Christian men. And one is there's a great set of materials called The Primal Path, put out by John Tyson. He's a pastor in New York.
Hmm.
And, I kind of am doing that with a group of guys with our sons. It's super inspiring. I took my son to the Grand Canyon. We hiked it together, and it was beautiful and amazing. And it showed that, like, the young people are good news. There's a
Yeah.
generation coming that is full of creativity and brilliance and the potential for great deeds, and we have a great responsibility to nurture that through good stories and good teaching. But they're amazing. The next generation, that's my good news.
Okay, love it. Well, I'll post a link to that in the show notes, and so if there are dads out there who want a way to sort of connect with their sons and sort of um, help guide them into excellent manhood, I think that's something that every generation kind of has to figure out how to do, and we sort of succeed to varying degrees, but yeah. Love it. All right, JB, thanks so much for your time this evening. This has been a real treat. I'm really looking forward to finishing the Black Tower here. I hope soon, and I'll definitely be What's the name of the other trilogy?
The Omega trilogy, and
The
book
Omega
one is
trilogy.
Unbound.
Right. Okay. Well, awesome. That is gonna do it for us here today. And as always, please connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at 2geeksoup. You can send me an email, 2geeksoup@gmail.com. Ratings and reviews are super helpful so that other people can discover this show. And even though it may make me the grumpy janitor, this podcast is a proud member of the More Than One Lesson faculty.